Okay, so what I want to do is build a simple web app that will demonstrate what method override does and why we need to have it. So again, I'm just going to go from scratch here, and I'm going to make a directory. I'll call this Acme Products, and I've got a few of these, so I'll say Acme Products too, and I'll cd into here. Now, the one thing that I know that I need to have is I need to have Express. So the first thing I'm going to do is say npm init with a y, just so I have the basic settings here. And I'm going to specify npm install Express, and I'm going to save. So now I have Express. I've actually got NodeMon installed globally. And again, if you ever want to see where something is installed, you could say, which NodeMon, and you'll see where it is. And what I'm going to do here is let me open up my editor of choice, bring it up here. And right off the bat, I'm going to create a server.js file. And let me go to my package JSON. And I'm going to specify a start dev. And the reason why I'm doing this is that when this ends up being deployed, we're going to want to start things differently. But when I'm starting in my development environment, I'm going to specify that I want my port to be 3000. This is an environment variable. And I'll say NodeMon server. And if I go and I run that, NPM Run, and again, if you forgot what you called it, just do NPM Run, and you'll see that you've got an NPM Run start dev. It'll sit here and run and not really do anything. If I move this down here, we'll get to see changes that get made as we end up going in here. So for instance, if I just said process console.log, let's actually set it up this way, constant port equals process environment port. I say console.log port. And I run this again, you'll see that I've passed in 3000, and you can see this is actually what's getting called, so that makes sense. So let's set up our Express app. I'm going to bring in Express. And I'm going to specify that I have an app. And again, even as we do this, we could just sort of make sure that we don't have any errors coming out here as we're building this out. And we'll specify that we want to have our app listen on our port, which is going to be constant port, process, environment port. We can give a default value for this, but let's actually just use this. And we'll listen on our port, and then let's just write a message out, and we'll use our ES6 backticks, listening on port, $port, backtick, close, close. So now we should see that we're listening on port 3000. Of course, if we ended up opening up our browser and going over to localhost 3000, we would end up finding out that we're not able to make this request because we don't have a route set up for this. So let's go in here and we'll do an app .get, and we'll keep this fairly simplistic here. We'll do an app.get, and we will put in our middleware request response next. And again, if we just want to get this going with a couple of lines of code, we could say response.send hello. Come down here. Again, NodeMon's going to restart. Actually, we got an error here. So missing, and I think I'm mixing up my syntaxes here. Here, if I just want to use my fat arrow syntax here, I could do this. And now, if we go back here and we rerun this, we'll see that we have hello. So let's quickly set up a templating engine for this. And let's go in here. And if I go over here and I say constant swig equals require swig, I'll get an error that it can't find swig. So I'm just going to go in my other terminal, say npm install swig, save. So now I've got swig over here, and if I specify, and this is what you want to do this with swig, is say swig set defaults cache false. You don't want it storing your templates here. If I go back here, set defaults, not default. So again, one line at a time. And there's a couple of other settings that we're going to need here. Instead of just doing response.sendHello, let's do response.render index. And it's going to look for an index file. Actually, we'll get a different error here. The error that we're going to get here if we end up going into our browser is to specify you don't have a default view engine, right? No extension was provided. So we're going to take care of that by going over here and saying app.set view engine, and we're going to say use the extension HTML. Now, once we end up doing that, we'll get a different error message. So we've got an extension HTML that it's looking for, but we haven't defined the module that we're going to use. So now we say, hey, look, we're actually going to specify app.engine HTML, and we're going to use the method swig.renderFile. Now again, one thing that's important here, if we do this, let's make sure I have this correct, okay? So here we have a different error where it can't find this index file. And I just want to show you a couple things about middleware. If you were to go over here and if you were to go over here and actually do a console.log swig.renderFile, it'll tell you that this is a function, which sort of makes sense. This is a function that's going to end up rendering our file. And so let's actually go in and create this directory. We'll do views. And we're going to keep this really simple here. We'll say index.html. We're not going to do any layouts. This is not really about Swig. We're going to go over, excuse me, this is not, this is less about Swig. We'll just keep this pretty simple. We'll just have one page here, our body. We're not even going to have any style sheets here. This is all stuff that you could end up adding in. And I'll just go over and put this in. So now if we go back here, it'll find this page. Now what I want to do is I want to loop over a collection of products. So we're going to do this in a pretty simplistic way here, pretty naive way. We're going to specify that we have a constant of our products. And again, this would normally end up going in another file, but again, all we're trying to do is demonstrate the method override. And this, in fact, really should be an array. So this is the next thing that we'll end up setting up. So we'll set this up for 3 products. We'll have an ID of 1, and we'll do a name of foo. And we'll do 1 for bar. And we'll go over here and we'll do 1 for Baz. And let's just indent this so it looks a little bit nicer. And what we'll do here is when we go to render, we'll go here and we'll specify that we have a, we're going to pass to our templating engine. We're going to end up passing products equals products. Although if this is ES6, we could just end up doing that. And now if we end up going back to our index.html just to see that we have something here, right, one step at a time, we say products.length, we should see the number 3. Great. And now we'll just do a simple unordered list. We're going to use our swig for. So for swig, we're going to specify for product in products and for. And we'll go over here and we'll put a list item And for now, we'll just show the product.name. And once we end up doing that, we should see our 3 products. Now, what we want to do here is we want to put within this, we only want to demonstrate method override. And so what we want to do is put a delete link here. We want to have a link over here that looks like when the link ends up getting clicked on, what we're going to end up doing is deleting the product. And let's actually do this just to keep this a little bit simpler. Let's say we have an input tag, a button, and we'll go over here and put in delete. So now we've got this delete button that we want to set up that's obviously not doing anything now. Now, what we need to do here, the way that this is going to work with method override, is that we have no way. Let's actually take a step backwards and see what our route is and how we want to call the route. What we want to do is we want to have a route that ends up deleting a product. And the way that we want this to work is we want to say app.delete. And what we're going to do is we're going to go and do a delete. And when we go and do this, we're going to specify that when we go and delete, we're going to pass in an ID that's here. So again, we're doing this off the main route, which again, we would probably have this nested in some router. But all we're going to do here is once we end up getting this set up, for now, let's just do a response.send request params.id, and we'll just put a little message here. We'll use our backticks. Your ID is $request params ID. Now the question is, how do we end up calling this delete route? We really have no mechanism for this from the browser. And so in order to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to put in a form. And we're going to specify that our form, the method is going to be post. And again, we only have 2 choices. We either have post or we have gets. And we want to use method override. Method override is going to work by allowing us to have a post and put a variable in that specifies really what action that we want to take. So our action is going to be slash, and we'll put in method equals delete. I think this could be either uppercase or lowercase if I remember correctly. And we'll do the end of our form. And so we'll have our delete button in here. This is actually a form by default, and most browsers give some padding around the form. So if we went back here, we would see that this is going to go to the next, not just padding, but treats it as a block element, which is fine. We're not going to win any style awards, obviously, but let's go over here and let's make this type a submit button. So what's going to happen now, this is just going to be seen as a regular post with some parameters here. And if we go and do this, it'll tell us that we can't post. And by the way, we don't want to post. We want our routes to be descriptive. We want them to make sense. And if you're going to have a route that's going to end up deleting something from your system, you want it to be a delete route. If you insert something, you want it to be a post route. If you end up updating something, you either want it to be a put or a patch route. And obviously, if you're just going to get something to display, it's a get route. We call these RESTful routes. So what we want to do here is we would like to go and set this up so that we can get this to work. So that's the next thing that we're going to end up doing, and we'll do it with a method override. So the module that I want to get here that's going to handle this for us is going to be constant method override, and this is going to be require method override. Now again, this is not installed here, and again, the reason why it's called method override is that we're going to override a post, and we're going to end up turning it into a delete, which is what we want to do. So now if I actually went back here, I would see that this is going to end up breaking. Can't find method override, but let's go in here and we'll do npm install method override, and we'll end up saving it. And if this is done, let me go in here and actually let me set up method override. And what I'm going to do here is specify that our app is going to use the middleware. And the middleware that I want it to use is method override. And there's a number of ways to set up method override. But what this does is this says, hey, look, if you have a post, I'm going to look and see on the query string if you have an underscore method. And if you do, I'm going to change your action to a post, from a post, to whatever this method is. So what this should end up doing is that if we end up going back over here to our index page, it should see this and say, this is really delete. And so it's basically going to do exactly what it says it's going to do. It's going to override the method. Instead of it being a post, it's going to do a delete. And we should end up hitting this route. So let's just see if we can do that. Let's go back here. When we click on delete, it says we cannot delete. So let's take a look and figure out why that is. So our issue here is kind of simple. I actually went and looked at the documentation. It has nothing to do with that. The problem is I'm trying to delete without any parameters here. So my path, this is actually an interesting thing. I mean, I could get this to work by doing this. And we haven't, I don't know if you've looked at this before, but we could specify, well, maybe we'll pass you an ID and maybe we won't. In which case, if I went back over here and reloaded this, it'll tell me that my ID is undefined. And really what I want to do here, I don't want this to be a possible ID. I need this to be an ID. So let me go back over here and just modify this action. So our action is going to be, and we want to put our ID in here. So again, this is going to be done on the server. This is going to be Swig that's doing the work. We'll say product ID, and then this should get called with the appropriate ID. So again, the big takeaway here is that method override will actually go in and pass in the appropriate ID. Again, this is a post for all intents and purposes. Even if you open up your developer tools here, you could always investigate if things are not working. Take a look at your network tab. This is going to be a good friend of yours. And if we go back here, we can see we have a GET request. And here we could see we have a post. By the way, if you want to preserve all your calls, you could put preserve log on here. And now if I went back and I reloaded this, we could see we're calling this with 3, and we're calling this with 2. Notice, by the way, if I reload this page, right, this will keep on coming back. What I really want to do here is that I would like to actually delete that item. And so in order to do that, what we're going to do is we'll go over here and we'll actually delete the value with this ID. It's actually important to realize that if I was to say console.log type of request params ID and go back here and click on delete, I could see that it's a string. And I really want it to be an integer. So this is how one way we could coerce this into an integer is just by multiplying it by 1. And now when we click on delete, I see that it's not a number, so that's not quite right. And let's just take a look. Let's print that out. One other way to see this is that if I go back here and I click on delete, I'll see that it's a number. And I think one way we could actually get this to work is to say const ID equals request params ID times 1. And now if I was to actually say type of ID, it should actually show me it's a number. So now I've got a number, which is good, because what I want to actually do here is that I want to pull out from products the item that has this ID. So one thing that we could do here is let's go and find the item. There's a couple of different ways you could do this, and really it doesn't belong here. This should actually be, we should have some sort of database class, but in the sort of dealing with the time constraint, let's actually do it so we can just find this item and then delete it so we can just complete the loop. So one thing that we have is that we're using ES6, and we made this a constant. That's just the way that we set it up. We could always modify it, but since we ended up doing this, what we're going to do here is let's actually say const, and we're going to find the product, and the way that we're going to find the product is we're going to say products.filter, and we're going to filter on a product, and we're going to specify the product's ID is equal to, and I can do the triple sign for this ID, and we're going to be very, go a happy path here by assuming that we're going to find the product. If we didn't, we could decide to do something else, and just to see if we found the product, let's just, again, one step at a time, log out the product. And so if we go back here, go here, we should see that if we click delete, it'll end up finding foo, it'll end up finding bar over here, and so on and so forth. And what we really want to do here is that since we can't assign products a new array, again, just the way that this was set up, let's do another const for index, and say index is going to be products.index of product. So what this says is that the actual product that we get back, what's its index within this array, because we're going to need that for the splice method that we're going to use, and we could log the index. And so now if we run that, we'll see that the foo is going to be at position 0, the bar is going to be at position 1, and the baz is going to be at position 2. So now we simply have to go in here and specify products.splice, meaning we're pulling something out of the array, and what are we going to pull out? Well, we're going to end up pulling out at index one element, and then we could do console.log products to see if that ended up working out. And if we go back here and we click on foo, we can see that we've just got bar and baz. And if we click on bar, we can see that we just have baz that's left. And one thing that we want to do, again, I just wanted to see that we were able to modify this array. So when something's a constant, you could modify it. You just can't assign something else to it. And whenever we end up doing something destructive or we end up inserting something, basically when we change something, the pattern is to basically do, and this is in traditional web applications, the pattern is to do a post or a delete or a patch and then redirect. And so what we're going to do here is once we end up doing this, we're going to say response.redirect. Where do we want you to redirect to? Just go back to /. And if we go back here, we'll find that we have all three. And again, if you look at this, I'm going to clear this. Again, I've got my preserve log on here. So what happens is that I do a delete, and what ends up coming back from the delete, a redirect gives us a status code of 302. Not only that, it says where to go back to. So our response header says, hey, look, this is a 302, and we want you to go back to /, and that's exactly what it does here. And then I'm left with these two elements, and I could delete this guy, and I could delete this guy. So that's the basics of what method override does. That's how it works. And again, the place that you'd end up using it is when you want to do things that do either a patch or a put or a delete, because you can't do that with a regular form submission. And that's what we want to do, and we're allowing our method override to do the work. So just one last thing. If you decided to, there would be nothing that would prevent you from going into method override and seeing how it works. And one thing that you'll see here, if you go to method override and you go into this folder, what you're seeing is that we're exporting this method, and we're calling it by just passing in this getter. And here we're specifying, I mean, you could sort of go through the code and see, what it's actually doing here. But I mean, if you go down here, you'll see that we're replacing the requests methods to a different method. You could go in here and see, this is a fairly, probably covers a bunch of other things as well, but if you wanted to create your own simplistic method override, and again, this is giving you many different ways to set the method override. You could end up setting it with headers and that sort of thing, but this is where the logic is so that you don't have to create your own logic that's going to allow you to basically create these more descriptive routes. Again, the big part of this is that we want to have routes that make sense. So if we are actually deleting something, we want our route to be deleted. If someone's going in to look at your code, they could look at this and be fairly certain that this is deleting something. And again, since we're only dealing with products here, it sort of makes sense that it's deleting a product. Same token, if you had an app.post, there's some assumption that you're going to be inserting something. And if you had an app.patch with an ID, you would be updating something. And that really covers all I wanted to talk about method override.